Every nation has their legends and their myths. Some of these nations have legends that bear similarities to one another. For the Maya, they tell the story of the mother of monsters, Jorogumo, the great spider who lived 400 years to become a yokai who births other yokai. But to the Ashfeldians, they know of a spider of a different sort, Arachne, the first spider. According to the legend, the Greek goddess Athena discovered a seamstress who wove beautiful tapestries, and many claimed she was a match for the gods, if not greater. Athena challenged her to a competition, and in the end, not only did Arachne defeat her, but her tapestry portrayed mocking caricatures of the gods of Olympus. This blasphemy, as well as the shame of defeat, could not be abided. So, in her anger and jealousy, Athena cursed Arachne. Transformed into the first spider, she would be doomed to weave tapestry for the rest of her days, and her children after her would all share in her twisted fate. This punishment was too far. Even the humans of Greece knew this, and learned to fear the gods even more, for the gods were justice. But Arachne never forgot, and she never forgave. She swore that the gods would pay for what they had done, and that justice would be served. For the gods' justice is what they take, and if not by her own doing, then by her children. In the border between Ashfeld and Valkenheim there is a great fortress called Ungoth. This fortress was once the site of many battles between the Vikings and the knights, but after the Truce of Wyverndale it took on a new role, a seemingly better one. Rather than a fortress the two forces would fight for, it was a place of competition and combat. Every season, Ashfeld and Valkenheim would pit their finest warriors in the arena of Ungoth to fight for sport, for entertainment, and to gamble. It was presided over by an Ashfeldian nobleman named Eric, a man who was wise and powerful in all he did. It was said that he carried the blood of Athena herself within him, for his word was law, and his mind unshakable. He oversaw the fights, and would determine the victor based on their valor, strength, determination, and bravado. None questioned his rules, his will, or his decisions, for he was truly a man of wisdom and justice, and his rule lasted for some 12 years. One summer, a cold shadow seemed to rest over the fortress of Ungoth. As the seasonal matches began, a new contestant would enter the arena, and her presence was one that made many quite uncomfortable. She was a gladiator, adorned in silver, steel, and pale garments. Feathers adorned her helm, and her trident had stains upon it that resembled blood. Her eyes were pale, like they were glazed and inhuman. Afraid of this woman, when asked for her name at the start of her first match, she bowed and smiled to him with a grin that held very little warmth. "My name is Sylvana," she said proudly. "It is a great honor to fight before you, Lord Erich." Erich was still uncertain, afraid even, but the rules were clear. She would be allowed to fight, and fight she did. Her first opponent, a berserker of no small skill, entered the arena to challenge Sylvana. The fight was furious and close at places, but in the end Sylvana outmaneuvered and skewered the berserker. Before she could deal the final finishing blow, Erich stopped the fight, declaring her the winner. Sylvana bowed her head in acknowledgement, and then left the field. The berserker was taken out of the arena and treated, and Erich knew that if he had not stopped her, Sylvana would most likely have killed him. There was something about her that reminded him of a predator. But surely, even the most ruthless predators could be defeated. He would arrange matches for her that would surely end her life, and he'd just be too slow to stop the duel before she was killed. That was what had to be done. That was what he would do. None would question it. He was wise, after all. He was the embodiment of justice, and the people respected his wisdom. But no opponent could defeat Sylvana. A great Shugoki was brought to his knees. A warlord suffered the loss of an eye. 2 wardens were left incapacitated, and 1 Valkyrie would likely never be able to fight again. Each time she was put into the arena, and each time the warrior before her had tried to best her, Sylvana's movements, strength, and speed were nothing short of remarkable. When she was struck, she would endure it and retaliate. When she attacked, she never failed to bleed her foe. Each movement, each blow, and each victory put more terror into the heart of Erich. And when she would bow to him, he felt a stirring of terror in his heart, as if she were merely building up to him, as if she saw him as her final prize. Sylvana could not be allowed to win. Days had passed, and the tournament would draw to a close soon. Only Sylvana and a raider named Grath remained. Erich approached Grath before the fight and instructed him to kill Sylvana by any means, even if it meant being underhanded. It would not be held against him. He was promised this. Grath agreed, and when the battle began, it took no time for Grath to become underhanded. When Sylvana attempted to strike at Grath, he turned, grabbed her by the cloth of her garments, and attempted to rip the clothes from her body. Forced to prevent this, she dropped her guard, which allowed Grath to get an easy strike. The crowd was stunned. It was against the rules to try to disrobe an opponent in the arena, but Erich said nothing. The battle resumed, and this time Sylvana began landing a few critical strikes until she was grabbed by the throat, and Grath began to strangle her. Sylvana cried out as the air was taken from her lungs, but again Erich said nothing. Sylvana broke free of the grasp and threw her trident at Grath, who dodged it. She rolled and then kicked out his leg before retrieving her weapon. Grath then did the unthinkable. Sylvana ducked under the axe swing of her foe, only to see Grath pull a dagger from his rear pocket and plunge it into her shoulder. This was too much for the crowd, who began booing and howling in disgust. The use of a hidden weapon was truly an unforgivable offense in the arena, and yet Erich remained silent. This was the final straw. Ripping the dagger from her shoulder, Sylvana finally roared with a near inhuman anger and thrust her trident into the abdomen of Grath, who coughed and tried to get off of her, but she instead shoved him against the wall and began using her buckler to beat him again and again across the face. Grath was barely conscious as his body started to slump over. The crowd cheered as the cheater was beaten again and again. "Stop!" Erich finally shouted. "This match is over!" Grath sank to the ground as Sylvana glanced back at Erich with disapproval. Erich was trembling with terror. Every dirty trick had not stopped her. She'd held a resilience he didn't think possible, and she still stood before him as a menacing predator. Erich then coughed and announced the winner. "Grath is the victor!" The crowd roared their anger at Erich, their disdain, their disbelief. Grath had not only cheated, but had clearly lost, and now Erich, the wise and fair ruler of Ungoth, was now declaring him the winner of the tournament? It was unfair. It was unjust. It was wrong. Erich immediately left the arena to return to his palace to escape the harsh criticisms of the people. They could not understand his fear, his terror. That woman in the arena struck a nerve in him that he could not explain. He had to be rid of her. He could not bear the sight of her, even if it meant being unfair and unjust, even if it meant betraying his own principles. That thing could not best him. As Erich retired to his bedchambers for the evening, and he lay in his bed, he suddenly heard something in the shadows of his room. He sat up in surprise to see a figure appear, clad in pale armor and holding a trident in her hand. Sylvana the Gladiator had emerged from out of the darkness itself. "How did you enter here?" he demanded, starting to rise. The woman did not answer, but only stared with those terrifying pale eyes. She removed her helmet to show long, snow-white hair and a face that, while beautiful, had a very frightening countenance. "Get out of here! Begone from my sight!" he shouted. "You who carry the blood of Athena in your veins," Sylvana hissed. "I see now that you are every bit as backwards and vile as she was." Her voice was only partly human. There was a gentle echo, a hissing backdrop to it, a nightmare-inducing, skin-crawling edge. "The wisdom and justice your patron deity claims to stand for is a farce, a charade put on so long as her whims are met. But when she is dissatisfied or disapproving, suddenly justice must bend to her needs, and fairness and compassion are thrown to the wayside." "Quit talking nonsense and leave!" "I came here to see if you were any better than she, a wiser and more fair specimen than the bitch you claim to embody. But you are as she was. You submitted me to torture. You excused blatant foul play, and to add insult to injury, you robbed me of my rightful victory. Then you flee like a coward to hide from your sin. Mother was right about Athena, right about you. Right about your supposed justice and wisdom." "I said get out!" Erich grabbed for his sword to strike her down, when suddenly he froze in place. His arms would not move. His body would not obey, as if invisible threads held him in place, unwilling to allow him to go any further. He looked around him to see that long webbing had suddenly caught him like a bug, and the silk would not break for him. The pale eyes of Sylvana fell upon the struggling Erich, and she gave a faint hiss. Justice is for those who take it, Lord Erich. And as Athena took her justice and you took yours, I shall take mine. In the morning, when the soldiers entered the bedroom of Erich the Wise, they saw no body, no corpse, only a room filled with webs and silk nets that hung from every wall and every corner, and a cold eeriness fell upon the room like a dark shadow. But Erich himself was never seen again. The Mother Superior closed her storybook and leaned back in her creaky old chair. The story concluded. The children all gathered around, wide-eyed and fearful. She smiled at them. "Oh, don't be so afraid, children. It's only a story, after all." "But what if it's real?" one little boy asked. "What if Sylvana comes for one of us next?" "But why did Sylvana come for Erich?" the Mother Superior asked. One little girl's hand shot up. "Yes, Nora?" "Because she had been treated unfairly and with wickedness," she answered. "That is correct," she answered, "and that is why you should always treat others with respect and decency. As Sylvana said, justice isn't something you uphold when it's convenient for you. It's a principle we hold to regardless of our circumstances." The children all smiled and looked between one another, but Nora was still frowning. "Mother Superior," Nora asked, "was Sylvana doing what she did to punish Erich for what was done to her mother, Arachne?" The Mother Superior frowned. The fact that Nora, of all people, asked this upset her slightly, given her own troubled past. "I believe it was more to do with the fact that Erich had done wrong just as Athena had. But again, my dear girl, it's only a story, and we must learn from it." Nora fell silent again, and as the children left the cathedral classroom, the Mother Superior returned the storybook to its shelf. As she did, scuttling by, she saw a small pale spider scuttering away across the wooden surface, and she stared at it. The little creature scurried away towards the desk of Nora Arenalius and began building its web just under the legs. Was this a sign from the Lord? An omen as to what Nora would do in the future? The Mother Superior shook her head. She'd have to refrain from reading the Legend of Sylvana again in the future. It was just a story. And yet, sometimes, it felt hauntingly real.